A couple days ago, I came in yelling about how I just sat through 6 episodes of this show. Spoiler, it became 9 episodes, and the only reason it didn't become 10 is because, well, I had caught up at that point and had to exercise some dumb concept called patience. What did patience ever do for anyone anyway? So instead, I did the next best thing I do after consuming content, which is looking for more content to consume. But then I saw this and decided it was probably time to take a break. If you know, you know. You guys, do you see this? Look. Today, the finale is today. I don't know if my patience paid off, but it's here. Hey, hello. I would normally explain who I am, but we're already an hour deep spiritually, so subscribe if you feel safe here, even though nothing about that sentence feels safe. Burnout Syndrome is a 10-episode series that was first announced during the GMMTV 2025 lineup event, which began airing weekly on Ashi as well as their YouTube channel for some regions in late 2025. From the start, the project carried an unusual amount of weight, largely because of its lead pairing. The featured couple pairing is Off-Gun, and they aren't just seasoned actors. They are 2 of the original pillars of GMMTV's BL brand. Their history alone gives the series a baseline level of credibility before a single frame is even shown. With Off and Gun, we're past the wow, their acting improved, to watching them make deliberate choices and mastering their art with authority. We know this is a project they chose to do, something they greenlit for themselves because they saw value in it. But there was something else that truly set Burnout Syndrome apart early on, which was its casting twist. The series brought in Do, a GMMTV actor who had never really been associated with BL, and they placed him squarely in a role where he openly and actively pursues another man. For many viewers, this was immediately notable. Do was first widely recognized through F4 Thailand, GMMTV's remake of Boys Over Flowers, and later appeared in Leap Day and a few romantic dramas along the way. Until now, his career had firmly belonged to what fans often recognize as GMMTV's traditional drama or prime time lane. Although you could argue BL is the prime time these days, the Licorns just haven't emotionally accepted it yet. But there's no hiding that within GMMTV, there has long been an unspoken divide in the roster. Not an official one, but a very visible one. Some actors are clearly positioned within the BL ecosystem, while others consistently work in Licorns, mainstream dramas, or prestige projects. Even when boundaries blur through heavy romance, certain actors are clearly kept outside the BL track. Win is a notable example, though. Despite being once the face of GMMTV's BL success, he stepped away from the genre after completing his original series and its sequel. However, Do seems to be doing get it? The opposite. I know I'm cracking jokes right now, but seriously, I get so far into the Burnout lore later, I have no time for fooling around. When Burnout Syndrome cast Do in a role that didn't just flirt with queerness, but fully committed to it, the message was clear. This series was intentionally breaking internal patterns, not just telling a different story, but challenging how GMMTV traditionally categorizes its own actors. And predictably, the internet did what the internet does. As soon as all 3 characters were placed in the same emotional orbit, speculation exploded. Not just about love triangles, but about whether Burnout Syndrome might push even further. Those few things alone signaled that Burnout Syndrome was never meant to be business as usual. The casting felt deliberate, the romantic structure felt unstable, even the trailer pacing resisted easy categorization. And when a project starts to feel a bit unfamiliar, audiences instinctively look for something recognizable. For many viewers, that point of reassurance came not only from the cast, but from the name attached behind the camera. The director of Burnout Syndrome is none other than Nucci, a name that already carries a very specific set of expectations within the BL fandom. Her involvement immediately reframed the series, because while much about Burnout Syndrome felt unfamiliar, Nucci's presence did not. The same director behind Not Me, a series that has since become one of GMMTV's most critically respected BLs, that also happens to star Off-Gun. In other words, Burnout Syndrome wasn't just introducing an untested collaboration, it was reuniting a creative trio that had already proven capable of delivering. Now, 4 years later, with even more experience and growth. All of a sudden, it felt like we were being promised a show with none of the bad risk and only the good kind. But let's start with a super quick overview. Burnout Syndrome follows Jira, a struggling artist who has reached a point of complete creative and emotional exhaustion. After struggling to find employment and freelance projects, he becomes entangled with 2 very different men. One offers stability and warmth, a connection that feels easy, familiar, and safe, and then the other offers access, power, and creative ignition, but at the cost of emotional imbalance and control. What makes this story unusual isn't the presence of a love triangle, but the absence of urgency. Jira isn't racing toward a decision. He's barely holding himself together, and the series doesn't frame that as a flaw to be corrected. It treats it as the reality of burnout. So if you're waiting for him to sit down, list the pros and cons, and pick a man by episode 4,
this is not that show.
Let's talk about why this love story feels wrong on purpose. This is the kind of show where you keep expecting the turning point, and it just never comes. Instead of escalating toward romantic clarity, burnout syndrome lingers in emotional limbo. Relationships overlap, boundaries blur, and the central question isn't who Jira will choose, it's whether he has the capacity to choose at all. Jira moves through the series almost administratively, day by day. Did I wake up? Did I function? Did I make it through today? Check. He isn't moving toward a breakthrough. He's moving through time. There are no dramatic resets, no episode where everything changes, no moment where love suddenly fixes what's broken, because burnout doesn't work like that. Burnout doesn't explode. It erodes. Which is not very sexy, but unfortunately very accurate. And this is where burnout syndrome starts to clash with BL expectations. In most BLs, every episode nudges the relationship forward. You wait, you suffer, you lock eyes in the rain, and suddenly your childhood trauma clocks out. So naturally, viewers keep waiting for the turn. This is usually the point where people ask, okay, but when does it get cute? It doesn't. And that's not a pacing issue, it's quite literally the plot. In burnout syndrome, relationships don't advance. They stall, they regress, they circle the same emotional ground forever. Romance doesn't create momentum here. It creates pressure. And for viewers trained on traditional BL structure, that can feel deeply unsatisfying. But for a story about exhaustion, that frustration isn't a flaw. It's literally the experience. There's also another layer here that's very specific to BL and worth mentioning because Off-Gun are a fixed ship. The audience doesn't come into burnout syndrome neutral. We come in trained. Burnout syndrome is built around a lot of uncertainty and emotional imbalance, so watching it through the lens of a guaranteed fixed pairing creates friction. Even when the narrative is clearly signaling discomfort, a part of the audience is still waiting for the familiar rhythm to kick in, the reassurance that this will eventually become an Off-Gun story the way we recognize it. Okay, yes. When do we emotionally unpack our bags? But we don't. Burnout syndrome resists that comfort. It uses the familiarity of the pairing and then denies the audience the payoff they've been conditioned to expect, which doesn't mean the story's failing. It means it's actively working against our habits as viewers. And honestly, that's the point, right? Isn't the biggest thing about GMMTV is that they always do the same thing and we're kind of tired of it? Well, this series proved that GMMTV is capable of doing a lot differently. If you're enjoying this BL deep dive and want to support the channel a bit more, memberships are open. You get early access plus a loyalty badge that changes over time, which is essentially a visual record of how long you've survived my commentary. Plus you get these channel specific emojis to roast me in the comments. Jokes aside, memberships generally help me keep doing this without burning out, so thank you to everyone who's joined. We have to talk about the bar because before we even get a glimpse of romance, the series quietly introduces us an alternative, the burnout bar. It's a place where strangers are paired together, not to flirt, but to talk. You sit with someone you don't know and unload whatever you're carrying. No promises, no continuity, no emotional responsibility beyond the moment itself. And Jira doesn't find this place on his own. He's sent there by Ing, who frames it not as entertainment, but as something closer to treatment. It helped her. It gave her space to speak without having to manage someone else's expectations in return. And that distinction matters. Unlike romance, the bar offers connection without obligation. You don't have to be your best self. You don't have to progress. You don't even have to come back. In a story about burnout, that kind of temporary, anonymous intimacy makes perfect sense. The bar fits seamlessly into the show's day-by-day structure. It isn't a solution, it's a coping mechanism. Another quiet checkmark on the list of survival tasks. Talk to someone, got through the night, check. Chronologically, the bar appears early, before Jira's romantic entanglements fully take shape. But thematically, its purpose only really becomes clear once we see how little relief romance actually offers. Because Jira doesn't stay there. Eventually, survival has to turn into work, and Jira begins working for Ko, initially doing small, vaguely defined tasks, like he represents him at meetings, acts as a stand-in in public spaces, becomes the visible presence for someone who actively refuses to be seen. At first, this arrangement feels transactional. Well, I think it's still transactional to the end, but we'll get to that. But basically, Jira needs income and Ko needs distance. But that boundary does not last. Probably because this man be naked all the time, but that's a different point. What Ko slowly realizes is that his insomnia, something that predates Jira entirely, eases when Jira's around. Sleep becomes easier, rest feels possible. Jira isn't just representing Ko professionally, he's literally out here regulating him emotionally. And this is how feelings develop in burnout syndrome. Not through grand gestures or romantic declarations, but through quiet realization that someone else's energy has become part of your ability to function. And this is where the show becomes deeply unsettling, instead of a turning point for things to get cute. Jira's presence now does something. It produces rest, it fixes a problem, and once that happens, his availability stops being neutral. It becomes valuable. Romance here isn't born from desire alone. It's born from utility, which is a very unromantic sentence, but unfortunately, that's the show. Ko doesn't fall for Jira because he's charming or exciting. He falls for him because Jira makes life bearable. And for someone already burnt out, being the thing that helps another person sleep isn't romantic. It's heavy. What burnout syndrome quietly suggests is that burnout does not make love difficult. It makes you vulnerable to being loved for what you provide, not who you are. That's why romance here does not heal. It drains. And which brings us to the people trapped inside the system, and probably why you feel like no one's really okay here. Everyone here is burnt out. Jira's burnt out. Pheem's burnt out, Mawin is burned out, the butler dude is for sure burnt out. There's probably only one person here that isn't freaking burnt out, and we'll get to him. So I've kind of given each character in this world a label for the type of burnout they are, and why love doesn't heal burnout, and basically how different burnout create different outcomes, especially in relationships, and I am now burnt out. Oh, Jira. Jira is depletion. Jira is not someone in crisis. He's somebody after crisis. By the time the series begins, the collapse has already happened. His career has stalled, his creative drive has dried up, his sense of direction is gone. What remains is survival. Moving through days without expectation that things will improve. When he starts working for Ko, it isn't ambition, it's literally just necessity. He needs money, he needs structure, he needs something to anchor his days, and the work doesn't feel meaningful at all, but it feels manageable in a way, and that's enough. Jira isn't incapable of love, he's incapable of holding love. Commitment requires a future-oriented self that Jira no longer feels connected to, and this is why he remains suspended between people rather than moving forward with anyone decisively. Not because he's cruel or indecisive, but because burnout has stripped him down to the present tense. He can respond, he can show up, but he can't plan himself forward. In many ways, Jira is the most honest depiction of burnout in the series. He isn't fighting it, he isn't naming it, he's just living inside of it. So if Jira shows us what burnout looks like when you're empty, Pheem shows us what burnout looks like when you keep going anyway. Pheem doesn't burn out loudly, he burns out correctly. His burnout is very mindful and behaved. Pheem meets Jira first at the burnout bar. Again, a space designed to strip away hierarchy and usefulness. For once, Pheem isn't valued for what he produces or maintains, he's just listened to and met without expectation, but he doesn't recognize that for what it is. As their relationship develops, Pheem doesn't simply fall for Jira. He adapts, he learns the artist Jira loves, memorizes their histories, absorbs their language, he lets Jira ruin his shirt for art without hesitation. He even gets an art-related tattoo, marking himself permanently with something that was never originally his. On the surface, it looks like devotion. In context, it's survival. Years of being valued for only his usefulness has taught Pheem that staying requires editing his life down to adapt. That love, like work, is something you earn by becoming indispensable. So instead of asking Jira to meet him where he is, he moves himself entirely into Jira's world. This is endurance as identity. That's why even during moments that should feel reassuring, Pheem is uneasy. When Jira ignores Ko's calls while they're together, Pheem isn't relieved, he's tense, already anticipating the cost of this piece. Burnout has trained him to enjoy happiness cautiously, to brace for consequences before they arrive. When he later walks in on Jira painting Ko after being blown off, Pheem is visibly hurt. His body reacts before his words do, and then he immediately neutralizes it by saying, "You didn't do anything wrong." That line isn't reassurance for Jira, it's containment for himself. Because for Pheem, the worst thing isn't being hurt, it's being a disruption. Even his anger follows the rules. After Jira chooses to stay with Ko, Pheem doesn't explode publicly or plan to confront anyone. He goes to a rage room, a space where anger is permitted but only in a controlled, consequence-free way. You can break things, but only the ones provided. You can scream, but only where it's expected. And this man is single-handedly keeping that place in business. Even in pain, Pheem remains legible. The series makes a devastating point here. Pheem has learned how to feel without making anyone uncomfortable. His endurance isn't strength, it's conditioning. And then we have Pheem's final act in the series, which is not a confession or a fight. It's facilitation. He's the one who reunites Jira and Ko a year later, and when he hugs Jira, it's not hopeful, it's final. He holds him like someone who already knows he's about to lose. That hug is endurance reaching its endpoint. Pheem doesn't reunite him because he believes it's good for him. He does it because he believes this is how you love. Quietly, completely, and at your own expense. Unfortunately, it's the kind of burnout society gives 5 stars on LinkedIn. If Pheem shows us what happens when endurance hardens into identity, Mawin, played by AJ, shows us burnout before it fully calcifies. He exists in the same system as Pheem, same company, same hierarchy, same corporate meat grinder, but the way he responds, complete different genre. When Pheem tells Mawin that Ko is cutting the entire department and that he's about to be laid off, Mawin doesn't intellectualize it. He doesn't reframe it as a growth opportunity. He doesn't open notes app to journal about resilience. He reacts. Very publicly. At an event, he throws pee at the person he believes to be Ko. A crude, impulsive, deeply unserious act aimed straight up the power ladder. Is it dignified? No. Is it effective? Also no. But is it cathartic? Absolutely, and that's the point. That ability to release, even badly or embarrassingly, is what separates Mawin from the other characters. Where Pheem absorbs pain like it's part of the job description, Mawin treats emotion as something that has to exit the body. Anger to him isn't a long-term subscription, it's a pop-up that needs to be closed. And then he moves. Almost immediately after the layoff talks, Mawin pivots. He uses his resources, even if that means couch surfing with Pheem for a bit. But more importantly, he doesn't bring stagnation with him. He brings motion. He interviews aggressively, he auditions for acting jobs, tech to acting, no shame, no TED Talk explanation, no "this has always been my passion," actually. To him, work isn't identity. It's just work. Swappable, temporary, subject to the vibes. That belief is exactly what burnout erodes over time. So when Pheem says something like, "must be nice to just be able to change like that," he's not criticizing Mawin, he's grieving a version of himself, one who still believed movement was possible, before staying turned into a personality trait. Mawin also becomes the one who drags Pheem back into the world. He pushes him to go out, to confront what hurts, to stop vanishing inward like a ghost haunting his own life. And when Jira chooses Ko, Mawin doesn't suggest quiet acceptance or emotional containment. He doesn't say, "be the bigger person." He takes Pheem to a rage room. Because Mawin believes release is necessary, even if it's messy, loud, and slightly unhinged. He doesn't believe pain should be endured indefinitely, like some kind of moral flex. He believes it has to go somewhere. Mawin represents burnout as mobility, that fragile window where escape is still possible. He's not healed, he's not enlightened, he's not running a podcast, but he also hasn't learned to confuse suffering with virtue. And crucially, this behavior only shows up under pressure. It hasn't yet metasized across his entire personality the way it has for Pheem. That's what makes him quietly radical in this story. In a world where endurance is praised, Mawin refuses to stay. In a system that rewards silence, he reacts. He doesn't dismantle the structure. Yes, he threw pee, but he knew damn well capitalism was still clocking in the next morning. He's not delusional. He just refuses to let it settle inside him. If Pheem shows us what happens when you stay, Mawin shows us what happens when you leave. Even clumsily, even without a plan, even while everyone's judging you from LinkedIn. And burnout syndrome makes a sobering point. The longer you wait, the harder movement becomes, and eventually you stop believing it's possible at all. Ko represents what happens when burnout stops being a condition and becomes a philosophy. Ko is not exhausted in the way the others are. He's functional, successful, calm, and in control. His burnout doesn't look like collapse, it looks like optimization. Ko shows us what burnout looks like when exhaustion is absorbed by the system and turned into control. The series gives Ko a backstory, that isn't about trauma so much as instruction. His mother tells him that his father was weak, a pushover who let emotion guide decisions, ultimately bankrupting their family business and suffering from a stroke from the stress of all of it. The lesson Ko absorbs isn't just failure is bad, it's cause and effect. Bad decisions destroyed everything their family had. The lesson is simple. Never let emotion interfere with output. So Ko doesn't burn out from overwork or heartbreak. He burns out from premature emotional shutdown. That belief shaped everything. He avoids visibility, replaces intimacy with distance, trust with structure. His insomnia is the only place his body tells the truth. A system that never fully rests because it never fully opens. This is why Ko sees no problem using Jira's artwork to train his AI. He bought it. The system allowed it. From his perspective, nothing unethical occurred. Creativity is a resource. People are inputs. Emotional harm is collateral. When a therapist suggests that he's surprised that Ko trusts Jira, Ko disagrees. Jira isn't trusted. He's predictable. Easy to read, minimal risk for Ko. Predictability is as good as trust. Even moments that look like care, like when he snapped about the car interior, but then later that day he did a 180, insisting taking Jira home when he's clearly going to get pee all over the interior. Yeah, they're not emotional breakthroughs. They're recalculations in real time. Risk management, control restored. Ko even apologizes that Jira got pee thrown on him, but it's not an emotional apology. It's a managerial one. The outcome was miscalculated, responsibility acknowledged, system corrected. That's what makes Ko unsettling. He isn't breaking the rules. He's following them perfectly. So where Pheem endures and Mawin escapes, Ko absorbs burnout and converts it into power. He represents burnout fully institutionalized, no longer something that hurts you, but something you wield. Ko isn't a villain in spite of the system. He's its most successful product. Ing represents the most regulated form of burnout. She isn't untouched by it, she's been there. That's why the bar exists in her life at all. But unlike the others, burnout hasn't become her identity, nor has it hardened into endurance, power, or avoidance. Ing represents burnout as something you manage, not something you surrender to. She shows up for Jira consistently and usually quietly. She lends him money, covers for him when his stories don't line up, offers practical advice, listens when he can't articulate what's wrong. She holds him emotionally and sometimes literally without demanding much in return. But Ing understands something most characters in burnout syndrome don't. Helping someone doesn't mean absorbing their collapse. She supports Jira without carrying him. She's clear about one thing: she won't do the work for him. Her care is conditional not on gratitude but on participation. If Jira isn't willing to help himself, Ing steps back. She knows that care without boundaries becomes resentment and support without accountability becomes harm. Ing is present, but she never replaces Jira's responsibility to move. At first glance, Ing doesn't seem central to the story. She isn't part of the love triangle, she doesn't drive the plot in obvious ways, she doesn't demand attention. But in a series where relationships repeatedly slide into extraction or self-erasure, Ing is the only person who refuses both roles. She proves that burnout doesn't always end in collapse, control, or escape. Sometimes it ends in boundaries. By the end of burnout syndrome, it becomes clear why many viewers might have walked away kind of unsettled. And a lot of people even said like they give them a month tops before Jira and Ko are breaking up again. This isn't a BL that withholds romance. It's a BL that refuses to use it as anesthesia. In most stories, love arrives to make suffering retroactively meaningful. You endure, you wait, and intimacy restores balance. But burnout syndrome denies that release, or at least leaves it open-ended. It asks a harder question: what happens when you're too exhausted to be saved by love? Through its characters, the series offers no easy answer, only patterns. Jira shows us what burnout looks like when you're empty. Pheem shows us what happens when endurance turns into self-erasure. Mawin shows us the fragile window where escape is still possible. Ko shows us what happens when exhaustion hardens into ideology. And Ing, quietly, deliberately, shows us that survival is possible, but only with limits. That's the show's most uncomfortable truth. Burnout doesn't explode, it erodes, and healing doesn't always look like passion, sacrifice, or devotion. Sometimes it just looks like boundaries. Burnout syndrome is simply asking the genre to grow up, to make space for stories where love doesn't fix everything, and where care isn't measured by how much of yourself you're willing to lose. And that's why it doesn't feel satisfying in the way we're used to. It was never meant to, which means the only person in the entire series who's actually okay is the burnout bar owner. Everyone else needs therapy, so this guy started a business. Even at the end, when they start throwing punches at each other, he runs outside. Not to stop the fight, not to fix anything, just to stand there and watch. The real endgame of burnout syndrome is whoever figured out work-life balance first, which frankly feels like the thesis.